right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Don Gulling, CEO of Verteks Consulting. I'm glad you joined us for the WatchGuard Threat Detection and Response webinar. We're going to jump right into the content here, but I want to start off by, first of all, introducing the topic and also talking about our presenter, and then I'll turn it over to Stephen for some background information and a live demo and discussion on WatchGuard TDR. So first, what is WatchGuard Threat Detection and Response? WatchGuard Threat Detection and Response is a system that's integrated in WatchGuard firewalls T15, 35, 55, 70, as well as our M270 and above series and our M440 and above series, and of course our Firebox Cloud and Firebox V if you have a total security subscription, or it can be added on if you have basic security. It can be an add-on subscription. But what WatchGuard Threat Detection and Response does is several important things. I know a lot of us are very familiar with the cybersecurity mantra of predict, prevent, detect, and respond, and that kind of being our approach to, predict what's going to happen in terms of threat intelligence and so on, prevent things from happening, detect when they do happen, and respond when they happen. Threat detection and response from WatchGuard kind of plays a role in all those. It has correlation and threat scoring. So using ThreatSync Cloud, it's a correlation engine that analyzes event data from host sensors, identifies malicious behavior, kind of predicting it's getting ready to happen. It gives you a score based on severity. It can prevent by doing things like host containment and automated response. What that does is control an infection on a PC because ThreatSync can quickly isolate a host machine on the network, preventing it from further spreading like a worm attack. Additionally, it can kill processes, quarantine files, delete registry keys. Also, it has host-based ransomware prevention. So it's a ransomware-specific module integrated in TDR that uses behavioral analysis to look for signs of ransomware. When it sees it, it stops it dead in its tracks. So it actually prevents an encryption attack. That's something we're going to show you live, an encryption attack being stopped. In addition to those things, several others. So TDR is a very powerful tool. It's integrated in the total security subscription on our T15s and higher, as well as our M270s and higher, M440s and higher. If you're not using it today, you should be. Our speaker today, we're pleased to have with us WatchGuard Technologies engineer, Stephen Sotelo. Stephen is one of our support team members, helping support Verteks as we go out to our customers to make sure their security is as good as it can be with WatchGuard. Stephen lives and works in Georgia. He comes down here quite a bit. He's probably met some of you in person. With that, I will turn it over to you, Stephen. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everybody. Don, I think you did a great job explaining TDR, and so we're just going to leave it there. Thanks, everybody. I think, Don, you did give a great example of what TDR is and the power of it, but we'll go into a little bit more right now. So we'll start by just kind of going over the agenda for today. As Don has already kind of done, we have a nice little introduction that we'll talk about here, and then we'll go into some of the advantages we have with our TDR solution. And then last but not least, we will do a live malware detonation and also take a look at the TDR dashboard. And then we'll take some questions. So first, what is threat detection and response? And as Don mentioned, it is a cloud-based anti-malware, anti-ransomware service. And with TDR, we are able to detect and respond to malware and ransomware threats. And you might be asking, well, why is that important? Well, because today we have malware as a service where attackers could go on to some websites and purchase malware packages, or even pay to have a author or a more advanced type of author create a specific payload or a malware package that could then be targeted at a user or organization that might have a unique vulnerability in their organization. So with the convenience of malware as a service, where attackers could buy or customize malware, we now have this situation where malware looks very unique. It does not look often like an existing known threat, because it is very customized. And that means that the users both on and off the network need to have protection more than ever. And as Don mentioned, we do have TDR integrated with the WatchGuard firewalls or fireboxes, and we have many layers of protection and security on the perimeter network. However, today, our many users are remote or traveling. I know recently I was working with a healthcare customer, and they give their doctors and nurses laptops to take between their locations. And so they're traveling to these different locations. And I even spoke with one of the nurses, and she mentioned that she actually goes home and updates the patient records from home. It allows her to have a little bit more flexibility in her schedule. So oftentimes, these corporate-owned devices are being used not necessarily behind a corporate network. So we need to add that layer of protection for those users that are traveling. And so how does TDR protect us? Well, some of the advantages we have with TDR is that we work with your existing antivirus solution. We do believe in a multi-layered approach. So we want to add as many layers of security as we can. So with the TDR host agent running on endpoints, in conjunction with antivirus and the signature-based solution it has, it can also be improved with the TDR layers, where we can then take events happening on the fireboxes on the perimeter level, as well as all the information and data coming in at the endpoint. And we even have some paid and subscription feeds as well. And we can then take all this data and detect behaviors and characteristics within this data to look for things similar to ransomware, 0 days, and malware. And then that would allow us then to prevent file encryption. And then we can take additional actions to remediate and remove that ransomware and those threats from your systems. And it's already included in our total security suite. So the heart of TDR is threat sync, and that is the powerful engine we have in the cloud that allows us to correlate all this data and information from, as I've mentioned, network perimeter devices like fireboxes, as well as the host sensors that are reporting information coming in on remote systems, and then as well as those subscription feeds and intelligence from third parties. And we take all of that information and we put it into ThreatSync so that we can analyze, score, and create policies to remediate and take action on those threats. Now, you might be saying, well, I already have antivirus, and that's true. But in today's more sophisticated threats and things coming across, the internet and different files and things, sometimes antivirus is only really able to kind of look at that signature to determine if that threat is safe or dangerous. Is this file known as a known threat, or is it an unknown threat? Is this file bad? And oftentimes, with malware being customized and changing its base and re-encrypting itself and doing a lot of more evasive techniques to try to make it more difficult for the signature and antivirus-based solutions to find. Oftentimes, some antiviruses are unable to detect malware. So oftentimes we call files that have a signature, and you can match a file to a known signature. We call those known threats. However, as I've mentioned, the world is a little bit more complicated. We have many unknown and evasive threats, and that's where the power of our TDR solution can really help with protecting those users from these types of threats. So how does TDR do that? Well, we can take a look at this upside down triangle, and you can see that we are focusing on those bottom two layers, the unknown and evasive threats. And we do that by looking at the processes and looking at suspicious things that are happening on the system that these processes are potentially doing. And we're able to do a deeper analysis on these processes and take action and mark those processes as potentially malicious. And we can do that because we have a host agent on those machines, and we are able then to analyze with greater detail the processes that are running, what the file system is doing, looking at the registry to see if any modifications or changes are being made there, looking to see if any calls are being made to command and control servers out on the internet, analyzing that network activity layer as well. And we're able then to take all this information, and as we've mentioned, we pull that into our threat sync engine in the cloud. And I know that this graphic looks a little busy, but again, it just shows the power of threat sync, where we take a scoring system of 0 to 10, and we then can mark different files and processes with a scoring system. And it's a Bayesian scoring system, meaning that it is a dynamic scoring. We might give it a 9, saying, hey, this potential file or process is looking a little malicious, but we're not quite sure. So we're going to give it a 9 and do some deeper analysis on that process. And then it could potentially change that score from a 9 down to a 2 or a 1 if it if it doesn't see any other characteristics to keep it at an 8 or 9 on the threat list. So after we've scored and analyzed different files, then we can communicate and talk with those hosts. And if we believe those malicious threats are dangerous, we can even contain or quarantine those remote hosts. And we do that by actually basically stopping all activity on the network card, except for a management port, so that we can communicate back with that host and determine if we've been able to remove or remediate those threats. And if we have been able to remove or remediate those threats, then we can put that host back in the network and bring it back online. So as I've mentioned, because we do work in conjunction with our WatchGuard fireboxes on-prem, then we do have an additional layer of detection we can do coming from events at the network level. And that includes being able to inspect HTTPS traffic, and being able to then also send things to our gateway antivirus, do some more intelligence on large files and data, and then even use our APT blocker to detonate and sandbox certain files, and then communicate the results of that back to TDR, then to have the TDR agent either remove those files or to allow those files through. So that is a little bit of a high level of
Great.
how.
No, that's great. I was going to say we've had a lot of questions coming in. I've been answering a lot of them via
I have
chat.
Okay.
Go ahead and wrap up that thought, and I'll hit a couple of these questions real quick.
Hey, I was just going to jump actually right into the demo. So if we want to answer some questions, or
let's do that first real quick, and then we'll do the demo. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of out of order. First question: I will send a link to SlideShare with all these slides to everybody on the webinar and to everyone who registered. So we'll make sure you get all those slides. That's been asked by a couple of people. Absolutely, you will get the slides. In addition to that, we'll post a copy of the video on YouTube tomorrow. Some specific questions, and to let the audience know, I did post a link to the TDR deployment guide PDF in the chat window. I'll also make sure I get it to all of you as a follow-up item. And it does talk about server deployment, whitelisting, and several of those things. One of the questions from the top of the reel was about compatibility. There's a whole list on there, but basically Windows 7 and beyond, or Windows 2012 and beyond, it's compatible. In terms of future development of TDR, to make it essential that it also aggregates logs from endpoints, I answered that question saying we have some very exciting announcements we're getting ready to make. I can't make them yet because they're not finalized, but I'll tell you, WatchGuard's been working diligently to put out some new technology for the endpoint exactly like that, and I think you're going to be very pleased with what you see very soon. So be on the lookout for that shortly. Same with log aggregation and tying this into the Verteks cloud. As far as a question about recommending an approach to deploying in a server environment, I want to answer that by saying I did give you that deployment guide, but also Verteks, we are using TDR internally, of course. We're using it on our servers. We have clients that have managed security with. We're using it on their servers. And the deployment guide does have great information on server deployments. I will tell you, on a personal note, it's working well. It hasn't created a lot of problems, really. There's not a lot of tweaking you have to do to it. It's I don't want to say set it and forget it because that's going to blow back up in my face, I'm sure. But it's been great so far. So super exciting that it's not been buggy. And as well as I posted that deployment guide in the chat window. As far as Active Directory integration, that's also addressed in that deployment guide. And so we can talk about that. As far as whitelisting goes, you can do whitelisting and you can do exclusions. We haven't seen many in terms of needed exclusions in the vast majority of cases, kind of small exceptions for specific line of business applications or people who have unusual software. In some of those cases we've had too. Next couple questions and we'll go back to the demo. Has TDR containment been updated to prevent access to mapped drive? I know this is a big ask. Mike, you mentioned it to us before, me and John, and we talked about it. I'll tell you that this announcement that's getting ready to be made about enhancements to the endpoint capabilities, as soon as those come out, I think that will be exactly what you're looking for. And that's very, very soon. It's like any day now. So I'll get back with you personally when that happens. And also, last question here, will the endpoint have a VPN client for road warriors? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Greg, you asked, and we got a couple things for you there. Today we're covering threat detection and response. So just so you know, Greg, if you have the threat detection and response engine on a notebook PC, and that notebook PC is untethered and not connected to the LAN, it's still working. And your ThreatSync cloud is still seeing it. It's still getting updates. And it's the ransomware prevention is still working. The correlation is still working. All that's still operational. So it's great for road warriors. In addition to that, though, not on this webinar, but make sure you keep your eye on DNS Watch Go. So DNS Watch Go is another part of our WatchGuard Passport, which is for mobile users that gives them enhanced security on the endpoint when they're untethered or off network or at home or at a conference. So the answer to your question is yes, great for road warriors, and it does update them while they're away. So I'll keep monitoring these chats and questions. We've got a lot of great info coming in. I'll make sure I circle back with everybody on all the things we talked on the question panel and turn it back over to you, Stephen, so we can see some of this in a live demo.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Don, for answering all those great questions. And I can also show in the dashboard here in a moment how we integrate with Active Directory, and I can even show some of those signature overrides as well, and how you could whitelist or even add on or add file hashes to a threat list if you do need to manually mark files to be safe or to be on a threat list. Okay, so if we are at the WatchGuard homepage and you've logged in, you're going to get to the Support Center. And from the Support Center dropdown under My WatchGuard, you'll go to the Manage TDR. And once I log in, because of the 10-minute logout I have set, I'll be taken to the main TDR dashboard. And from here, I'm going to select my specific lab account. And you'll see that I already have some incidences on my dashboard here. And I'll dive into these in just a second, but most everything on here is a clickable action, and then you can dive into even more detail on these different indicators to see what makes up the incidences within this indicator. So let's do a detonation and then come back into ThreatSync and take a look at what we can see here.
So when you say detonation, make sure you tell us exactly what you're doing, because I think we want to make the power of this is impressive when you see what happens and how we let it go through or don't let it go through based on what's going on with TDR.
Right. So this would be an unprotected Windows 7 machine. TDR is not running on here. So this would be an example of someone maybe receiving a file on their system. They just have just a Windows 7 machine here, and you can see I have a couple files with some Laura Ipsum text in it. And then I have an order receipt PDF file, and I'm going to go ahead and execute that file. It disappears. I'm questioning now if that PDF was safe to open. And then we will see in a moment, oh, there goes. Some of my files on my desktop have now been encrypted, and the system now has been destroyed. So it is crypto locked. I'm sure I can expense some Bitcoin in WatchGuard HQ. I'm sure will allow me to retrieve these files back, I'm sure. But in this case, I'm going to just power off this particular VM, and we will do the same thing now on a Windows 10 VM that is protected with the TDR agent. And then we can look in the dashboard and kind of see live what is happening. So I have those same files on my desktop, and I have a zip file with that order PDF in it. And I'm going to extract it to my desktop, and it's going to copy to the desktop, and it looks like it disappeared. Most likely because TDR noticed that it matched a crypto hash or parts of the file up, so it keeps removing that file. I can actually try to do it a little quicker and see if we can get some processes to actually launch here. And we'll go look at the dashboard now and see if any of those incidences are coming across. And we can even see in the host sensor on the virtual machine the quarantined file, and I was able to click it quick enough where some of the processes were launched. However, the host sensor again detected those processes and killed them. So if we look back at the dashboard, and I'm going to refresh this, we'll notice that right now there is some outcomes in progress. I'm just going to sort this by the latest, and we'll see that my virtual machine here has a score of 8, and that there is some remediation happening. and we can dive into this particular event and even look at some additional information on this indicator to get an idea of what is happening. And we can see that it was matched in the WatchGuard threat feed as a malicious threat. And then we can see what action was taken on this particular threat. So if we go back to this particular event, we can even take manual actions to manually remediate changes or manually remediate threats. Now, we can see that some of these threats were initially a 3. However, now it's a 1. Because again, we're using that Bayesian scoring methodology where we will change the scoring if we have taken action or we have determined that those files are no longer a threat to the system. And in this case, you can see that we have quarantined that file. I didn't even have a policy set to do that. It went ahead and quarantined it based on the settings I have set on the host sensor. And again, we can even go into more detail about what processes were being touched and what those files were doing that make up the whole incidences within this indicator. So multiple incidences make up indicators, and we can then create policies to remediate or remove those indicators. So we can look now even at some of the remediations that have taken place to see a greater in greater detail the whole overall scope of the power of TDR. We can see exactly the processes that were killed, and we can even select these individual files here and even add them manually to a whitelist or unquarantine them if we needed to. So looking now at some more settings in the dashboard here, we can kind of go over now the how you would maybe roll this out in an organization. And we have a few different ways we can roll out the host agents to individual systems. One of those ways is we can manually actually install the MSI file on systems, and then we can pass in the account ID and the controller address into those installer files to point the host sensor to your specific TDR account. We can even pass these on in through a command line. So we do have I think in that deployment document, you will see the exact commands to pass in these through a command line to make it a seamless install. As well as we can script this to be pushed out via a GPO policy. And last but not least, we also have an AD helper. And if you install the AD helper on an Active Directory server, then we can suck in all the hosts from your Active Directory, and those will then pull in underneath the host section. And I could then determine if the agent is installed on those hosts, or if we need to push the agent to the host if it can, or we can manually install the agent if we need to. And so from this host dashboard, we can see if the host is communicating or if we have some issues with the installation. We can take greater action to either manually uninstall those sensors if we need to. We can even manually contain the host if we feel like there is some threats on there that we need to mitigate or remediate manually. And we can even take a baseline. And that is one of the things that the host agent does on the initial installation, is it creates a baseline of your system. And that way, during the remediation phase, often we are able to remove those threats and malicious files that are on those systems because we can compare it to a baseline, and we can then get you back to where it was before those threats came in. And now going on to some more of the advanced options we have within TDR. As I've mentioned, we can pull in your domains here, and we can even add specific exclusions for antivirus software. And we even have already some predefined exclusions for a fair amount of AV vendors.
Yeah, I find that covers almost all of them, and WatchGuard has done a really good job of having predefined AV exclusions. I do want to make a couple of quick program notes, and I've had some other questions pop up I want to try to address if you can give me 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely.
First question that came up is about exclusions and whitelisting. And so what I did is in the chat window, I published a link on how to configure TDR exclusions. But if you click that, you'll see it takes you right to the KB article, which also has a hyperlink in there about whitelisting and tells you the differences between exclusions and whitelisting and how you'd set them up. I do want to make sure you have all the data on how to do all this because it's important that you can tweak and tune this. I just also want to say we haven't had to muck around with it a lot. I mean, once in a while, a little bit, but it's not one of these systems that's kind of, a beta and you're constantly mucking with it to get it to operate or not break things. It's really been working great with very, very few needs for whitelists or custom exceptions. So I want to show you how to do all this, but don't be worried that it's going to take up a lot of time. It just isn't. It's very simple to manage. So that's exclusions and whitelisting. Another question came through was about CyberCon levels. And is there a specific CyberCon level that we recommend? And so I want to quickly address that. What CyberCon is, or is cyber condition, is a concept that's important in the overall threat detection and response system. And what CyberCon represents is the readiness of your business to defend against an attack. They're numbered from 5, which is the least severe, to 1, which is the most severe. 5 means you're in a position that favors operations over disruptive problems. 1 indicates you're in a position that enables stronger precautions that could impact business operations. What that means is, as kind of things get worse, the CyberCon level would go up, allowing TDR to respond more forcefully on an automated basis. Frankly, 3 is where I put most businesses at when we set it up. CyberCon 3 is where we have them. So once you've kind of decided where you want to put it, you can do that, but do remember that each of those CyberCon levels and thresholds has ramifications. The WatchGuard Doc Center, which is really good access from Google, by the way. You can Google search WatchGuard CyberCon level, and it'll take you right into the WatchGuard docs. WatchGuard's done a great job of making all this stuff Google visible and not hiding it behind a wall. But it'll take you right to that threshold, talk about threat sync policy settings, how to change a CyberCon level, what happens when you changed it at that level, and so on. So that's the answer on CyberCon. And lastly, there was a question about anyone else having a warning ribbon saying a recent issue caused the AD Helper 584 update to fail. If it's had this issue, please manually upgrade AD Helper. I personally have not seen that, Al, but I will.
I just actually had that on my dashboard, and I clicked the X to remove it. Yeah, there was. It was just a warning to let you know there were some
manual upgraded and successful.
Yeah, the AD Helper. Yeah. It's a newer AD Helper you can install, and that's kind of the main message there.
Gotcha. Al's point was it kind of just keeps coming back. So what I'll do for you, what I'll do for you, Al,
come back every time you log in right now. And again, I think it's this just showed up. I think this week. Yeah. And I think it's just going to be there for another. I'm not sure how long, much longer, but not a long time. We will dismiss that message soon.
Well, keep in mind that there was a February 12 release of TDR. I think that's probably what we're contending with here. I'm sure it's being looked at, but I'll do this. I'll follow up with one of our guys one-on-one with you to make sure that we're getting you a very clear answer on what to expect going forward, so we can make that go away. Last question was, what about CyberCon levels? And if you can't move them up or down, what do you do then? So I'll definitely address that with you, but to change the CyberCon level, you got to have administrator level access to TDR. No one else can change it. So we got to make sure that you're logging in with an admin level account, because if it's not admin level, it won't let you change it, just view it. If you're an admin, you log into the TDR web UI as that admin, and then you should be able to change it up or down and click yes to confirm. So if it's not working, it's possible maybe that we accidentally set up your account not as an admin. That would be my guess. But love all the questions. We're definitely going to address all these and follow up with everybody as well, and make sure you get the info you need. Back to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Don. So as Don mentioned, we do have most AV vendors in the exclusion list here, which does make it simple to add the exclusion in TDR. So that is much more convenient than having to do it custom. But you still might have some shares and some areas within your file system that is very specific to some internal applications or proprietary scripts, and you might need to also add some exclusions to those folders, and you can do that as well in here. And we haven't talked much, but we have group configuration to make it easier to manage different types of hosts and servers. This way you could create, for example, like an 80 server group, and then you could have a unique set of host sensor configurations for that group. And then you could have a separate group and another unique list of host sensor options for that group. And then you can put certain actions and policies in that only apply to those groups. Now, going into the rules, the notification rules, this would be how you could quickly just create a rule and say, hey, anytime a system is contained, please let me know. So in this case, I can say I want to have every host in my groups, and all hosts in all groups that are contained and released, send me an email. And it's as simple as that to receive some notifications. And then also you have different types of policies that would be applied to different types of CyberCon levels, as Don mentioned. TDR can be, depending on maybe the type of organization, maybe you're a financial organization, have more compliance and regulatory needs and concerns, you could have a more aggressive TDR policy and more aggressive actions and remediation taken on your systems. Or maybe you're a bakery and you're not as concerned about threats coming in and targeting your users as much as if you were a financial institution, and you don't need as much remediation to be taken. You could change your CyberCon level, as Don mentioned, to be like a 4 or 5, to be a little less aggressive than if it was at a 1. And these policies also can be dragged around to different orders, so there is a precedence to the hierarchy of these policies. And you can adjust them, as I've mentioned, to work at a certain CyberCon level, or even at they don't even start to remediate or do anything until a certain threat level is detected, or a score is detected on a threat that is higher than, let's say, a 6 in this case. And last but not least, some of those signature overrides that we've mentioned. You can use like a MD5 hash software or program. There's a number of free ones available, and then you could take create an MD5 hash based off your file or file, and then you could add that in here as either a threat or as a whitelist. So definitely you have the option to really tune this to your needs.
One thing I want to reiterate and say one more time, of course, is that while you do have a lot of flexibility in whitelist and override and exception, and you also have flexibility in terms of configuring TDR policies and going into those policies and changing, ranking, whether it's a remediation or a block event or a containment event, and what CyberCon level it needs to be set for it to enable it. And you can tweak all that out. I will say that we've been working with this now since release on all of our internal systems. They all have it in our servers. And we've had very, very little need to make adjustments. It's been very, very minimal. So not a lot of administrative overhead. You're not going to be in a situation where you set this up and then now you're babysitting it day in, day out and constantly tweaking it out to make it work and not break things. That's just not the case. It's been super duper reliable. But for a lot of our hands-on folks who are really into it and are laser focused on the absolute best possible cybersecurity, you can continue to tweak it out and even add your own custom TDR rules.
And you can back these up and import them as well, so you do not have to recreate the wheel each time. The last thing I was kind of quickly going to go over is the options on the host sensors. And you can set the host sensor to detect. And what that means is that ThreatSync would notify you and show in the dashboard threats and create scoring on threats on hosts and probably create alerts and notifications that can come to you to have you then take manual action on these hosts. However, if you have it set to prevent, which is what I recommend, then the TDR, the host agent on these systems would actually take action to remediate threats and even contain the host if you have it set to do that down here under kernel host containment, to remove the host from the network, contain it, remediate it, remove all those threats, and then it can put the host back into the network once it has determined that it's back at a safe baseline. And you can even disable the users from removing the host agent. So I have it so that I can uninstall and pause and unpause my host agent, but we do have options to disable users from changing or modifying the host agent. And you can even change the baseline options, how often it does a baseline, and some other more specific options on quarantine files.
So while you, I'm glad you're bringing all this up, Stephen, and showing us that, and I like the granularity of that. That's really helpful. One thing I want to mention to all our guests today is that one of the best practices we recommend, and it's also in the TDR best practice and deployment guide published on the WatchGuard site, is you ideally want to manage these host sensors in groups. And so WatchGuard does have the ability to create host sensor groups and then assign them to those groups. So we typically have, like here you see on the screen that Stephen had selected, an AD server group and a TDR demo host group. You can make this as multi-layered as you'd like in your organization, depending on the type of system roles you've got. But I could easily see one for, somebody mentioned road warriors earlier, right? Maybe you've got one for, users with extended mobility. Maybe you got one for desktops. Maybe you got one for regular Windows servers, another one for DCs, or maybe you've got one for, your telecom server. If you got a Mitel system, you want to do something different on that. But you create the groups, then you assign hosts to groups, and then in the groups, you set up host sensors for that, or host sensor settings for that group. So you can set up 80 servers, then all your 80 servers are in that group, they get these set of rules. The same goes for your desktops and so on. So remember that that's a best practice, is to use those groups and configure settings by group. Lastly, when you first turn it on and set it up, the best practice sensor settings are already enabled. So there's a balanced approach. There's one that says, you'll see in there, a setting for most Windows hosts. It's a set of settings. You'll see a set of settings for best protection. That's like a set of settings. Next, a set of settings for best performance. And then kind of a safe mode sensor settings. Those 4 different tiers of settings have been pre-configured, and you can just choose from those and tweak going forward. So use the groups, use the host sensor profiles, the ones that we mentioned, and kind of tweak from that point going forward.
Yes, thanks, Don. I think that was some good information to add. Often people just set it and forget it, so I definitely like covering as much as I can to make them as so they can tweak this to their specific needs. Last but not least, last thing I was going to go over really is reports. So we definitely have the ability to create reports, especially if you are needing to fall into a compliance regulatory category. We can have these reports be generated and scheduled to come to you, and that way you can have these ready if you need to, and these dive into a lot more detail about what's happening in this specific time range for this report.
One of the great things about these reports, go ahead, Steven. I was going to just.
Oh, no, that was mostly kind of the high level of what I was going to go over, and so.
So what I was going to ask or mention just briefly about reporting is that the most common use we've had for reports is for folks that set them up on a reoccurring basis, and then use those reports in a log or Outlook folder or on a server file share as a weekly or a monthly as evidence to support, or ETS, that they need for things like CGIS, HIPAA, PCI, GLBA, SOX, DFARS, you name it. You're in any kind of realm of requiring any type of compliance. I think almost everybody is these days. Having a weekly or monthly that you've got a historical data entry of and kind of keeping those collated gives you that critical ETS or evidence to support that you have what you need in terms of compliance and what you're doing to respond when you're in a situation requiring a response. So you can schedule them, they're automatic, really easy to use, very powerful.
Well, Don, I think that was the high level I had. I don't know if
that's
you
everything else.
Like me to go over...
Wait for any more questions. No, I think what we do is we had a couple of last of them roll in here, and just to reiterate what we're going to be doing is follow up. Number one, I will make sure that everyone gets a copy of the PowerPoint slide deck that we use for today. Number two, I did post in chat, and I also attached it as a handout, the WatchGuard TDR deployment guide and best practices. That's a PDF in the handout section right now. I'll make sure you get a link to that. We'll follow up on all the questions that were asked to make sure that those people that ask questions get the specific answers that they need if we didn't cover it in depth enough here today. And then 2 more things. In chat, I also posted the TDR exclusions and whitelisting link that takes you to the WatchGuard Help Center online. You could also just literally Google search WatchGuard TDR exclusions, and it'll take you right to that. The Google integration with the Help Center is fantastic. And last but not least, for everyone in the call, you're definitely going to want to register for our March 12th webinar that Mark LaLiberty, a senior WatchGuard security analyst, is going to present for us on evolving threats. He's going to do his evolving threat briefing. He did a roadshow with us last year, got rave reviews, had 45, 50 people per city. Everybody loved the content. It's updated, refreshed, and renewed with more information on specific threats they're seeing, what you can do to help protect yourself better. And Mark LaLiberty will be presenting that live via webinar on March 12th. I'll make sure all of you get a copy of that registration link. That said, we will kind of hover here in silence, looking for any other questions to pop through on the question portal. And anybody else in the chat, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. Everybody have a great day. Stephen, anything you want to say in closing?
No, just thank you for your time. Thanks, Don. And let me know if I can help in any way. Happy to help happy to answer any questions that come across.
Okay, great. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day. We'll sit tight and watch the questions. If you want to stay online and wait a minute, we'll be glad to sit here for the next 5 or so minutes monitoring questions in chat. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.